December 1944. A female prisoner of war camp in rural Pennsylvania. 23 German military auxiliary women sat in their barracks, expecting nothing but another cold, lonely day in captivity. Then something impossible happens. American guards arrive, carrying wrapped packages, a small evergreen tree, and boxes of decorations. "Merry Christmas," they say, in broken German. The women stare in disbelief. They are enemy combatants, prisoners of the United States Army, members of the Wehrmacht's Helferinnenkorps, who fought against these very soldiers. And the Americans want them to celebrate Christmas? Let me take you back to that extraordinary winter when enemy prisoners discovered that even in captivity, humanity could triumph over warfare. December 18, 1944. Camp Reynolds, Pennsylvania. Oberhelferin Greta Hoffmann pressed her face against the cold window of Barracks 7, watching American soldiers unload wooden crates from an olive-drab truck. For 6 months, the 24-year-old former Luftwaffe radio operator from Dresden had been a prisoner of war, captured when her communications unit was overrun in France. She expected punishment, hard labor, perhaps abuse. Instead, the Americans had provided heated barracks, regular meals containing more calories than Wehrmacht rations, medical care, and treatment that exceeded Geneva Convention requirements. But this, what she was witnessing now, seemed impossible. "They're bringing a Christmas tree," whispered Hauptführerin Ilse Schneider, the senior German woman in the barracks. "And packages. Look at all those packages." The 32-year-old former nurse from Munich had spent 3 years tending Wehrmacht wounded on the Eastern Front before her field hospital was captured. She had witnessed unspeakable horrors, learned to expect the worst from war. Yet here, in enemy captivity, she was watching American soldiers carry gift-wrapped packages bearing Red Cross insignia into the female prisoner compound. The psychological preparation for captivity that Wehrmacht auxiliary women received had been explicit and terrifying. Nazi propaganda had painted vivid pictures of what awaited German women captured by Allied forces: abuse, exploitation, cruelty. The indoctrination sessions for Helferin emphasized that capture meant dishonor, that enemy forces would treat them as both military combatants and vulnerable women subject to the worst treatment imaginable. Some women carried cyanide capsules, choosing potential death over the anticipated horrors of Allied captivity. The reality that Greta, Ilse, and 21 other German auxiliary women discovered upon arriving at Camp Reynolds in summer 1944 contradicted every element of their training. American military police processed them with professional courtesy. Female guards and nurses from the Women's Army Corps supervised their intake, conducted medical examinations with respect for privacy, and explained camp procedures in careful German translated by interpreters. The barracks assigned to female prisoners maintained separation from male POW sections, featured individual beds with clean linens, functional heating systems, and sanitation facilities that exceeded anything the women had experienced in Wehrmacht service. The systematic documentation of female prisoner conditions, preserved in War Department records and International Red Cross inspection reports, reveals an American approach to female POWs that reflected both Geneva Convention obligations and deeper cultural values about women's treatment. Military directives specified that female prisoners would receive gender-appropriate accommodations, female supervision when possible, protection from any form of exploitation, and treatment recognizing both their military status and their vulnerability as women in a predominantly male prison environment. By December 1944, the 23 German women at Camp Reynolds had settled into a routine that remained surreal despite 6 months' experience.
Morning roll call at 7. Breakfast featuring eggs, bread with real butter, coffee with sugar, luxuries that had vanished from Germany years earlier. Work assignments included laundry services, administrative clerical work, and light manufacturing, all voluntary under Geneva Convention provisions, all compensated with modest wages allowing purchases from the camp canteen. Afternoon recreation periods, evening meals, lights out at 10. The schedule maintained military discipline while providing comfort that exceeded what German civilian women were experiencing in the bombed cities of the Reich. But Christmas preparations represented something entirely different. This wasn't mere adequate treatment or Geneva Convention compliance. This was active celebration, cultural recognition, even joy extended to enemy prisoners by their captors. Lieutenant Sarah Mitchell, the Women's Army Corps officer supervising the female POW section, had proposed the Christmas celebration to her commanding officer in early December. These women have been model prisoners, she explained in her written request, preserved in camp records. They work diligently, cause no disciplinary problems, and show clear signs of psychological transformation. Allowing them to observe their cultural holiday would further demonstrate American values while supporting their rehabilitation.
The approval came with unexpected generosity. The War Department authorized expenditure of funds for Christmas decorations, a tree, and modest gifts for female prisoners. The American Red Cross contributed additional packages. Local churches, learning of the planned celebration, organized donation drives specifically for the German women prisoners. When Lieutenant Mitchell and 2 female guards entered Barracks 7 on December 18th, carrying the first load of Christmas materials, they encountered silence. The German women stood frozen, uncertain whether this was some elaborate psychological test or genuine kindness. Mitchell set down her boxes and spoke in careful, practiced German. "We understand Christmas is important in German culture. We want you to celebrate properly. We've brought decorations, gifts, and supplies for traditional foods. You'll have Christmas Eve and Christmas Day without work obligations. We hope you'll accept this in the spirit it's offered." Greta Hoffman later described the moment in a letter home, censored but preserved in military archives. "I thought I had misunderstood, that my German had somehow failed me after months of speaking mostly English. But Ilse confirmed what the American lieutenant said. They wanted us to have Christmas, in prison, while our families in Germany faced cold and hunger and bombs. The Americans wanted us to celebrate." The psychological complexity of this offer created what modern analysts might recognize as cognitive dissonance. These women had been raised in Nazi Germany, indoctrinated with beliefs about American cruelty and moral degeneracy. They had fought against these Americans, served the Wehrmacht that battled Allied forces. They were prisoners precisely because they had been on the losing side of military conflict. Yet their captors were offering not just tolerance of their cultural traditions, but active support for celebration. The decorations themselves carried profound symbolic weight. The Americans had purchased a 6-foot evergreen tree, traditional ornaments including glass balls and tinsel, strings of electric lights, and a star for the top. These weren't improvised substitutes or minimum gestures. They represented genuine Christmas decoration procurement at a time when many American civilians faced wartime shortages of such items. The decision to allocate these materials to enemy prisoners rather than American troops or civilians demonstrated a commitment to humane treatment that transcended mere policy compliance.
The younger women, particularly those like 21-year-old Haupthelferin Anna Weber, who had been Luftwaffe searchlight operators, approached the decorating with cautious enthusiasm. "I hadn't realized how much I'd missed Christmas," Weber later wrote. "In the military, everything became about duty and war. Holidays felt like weaknesses. But when I held those ornaments, I remembered being a child in Bavaria, decorating our tree with my mother and sisters. I cried while hanging the decorations. The American guards pretended not to notice." The food provisions for Christmas celebration exceeded even the generous daily rations. Camp Reynolds kitchen logs from December 1944 document special requisitions for the female POW section. Ingredients for traditional German Christmas cookies, including flour, butter, sugar, eggs, and spices that remain scarce in Germany. Provisions for roasted goose, red cabbage, potato dumplings, and Stollen, the traditional German Christmas bread filled with dried fruits and nuts. The American quartermaster provided these ingredients without hesitation, treating the holiday meal as legitimate requirement rather than excessive indulgence. Ilse Schneider, whose nursing background included some culinary experience, coordinated the food preparation with two other women who had worked in kitchens. The American camp administration provided access to the kitchen facilities during off hours, with a female guard present for security but offering assistance rather than strict supervision. The American Guard, Corporal Jennifer Walsh from Ohio, helped us find equipment and ingredients, Schneider documented. She asked questions about German recipes, wrote down instructions, said she wanted to make Stollen for her own family. The enemy soldier was learning Christmas baking from the enemy prisoner. The absurdity and beauty of it overwhelmed me.
The packages arrived on December 22nd. 23 individually wrapped gifts, each tagged with the prisoner's name, provided by the American Red Cross and local church congregations. The women approached the packages with trepidation, uncertain whether accepting gifts from the enemy constituted some form of betrayal or whether refusing them would insult their captor's generosity. Lieutenant Mitchell resolved the dilemma with characteristic directness. These are gifts, freely given, with no expectations or strings attached. You're welcome to open them now or save them for Christmas Eve. The choice is yours. The contents reflected thoughtful consideration of female prisoners' specific needs and preferences. Each package contained practical items, soap, toothpaste, hair ribbons, handkerchiefs, alongside small luxuries increasingly rare even in America: chocolate bars, hand cream, lipstick, magazines, and knitting supplies. Several packages included personal notes from the donors, American churchwomen, expressing hope that the German prisoners would find comfort and peace during the holiday season. These notes, written in English with attempted German phrases, carried messages of Christian charity that transcended national enmity. Greta Hoffman received a package containing lavender-scented soap, a small bottle of hand lotion, 3 chocolate bars, a movie magazine featuring Hollywood stars, and a handwritten note from a Mrs. Eleanor Thompson of Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Dear German sister, the note began in phonetic German. I pray this Christmas finds you well and that you will soon return safely to your family. May God bless you and keep you. With Christian love, Eleanor. Greta sat on her bunk holding the note, reading it repeatedly, unable to reconcile the kindness of this enemy woman with everything she had been taught about American hatred and cruelty. Christmas Eve arrived with unseasonable warmth, temperatures reaching 45 degrees, melting the snow that had fallen earlier in the week. The female prisoners spent the afternoon completing their preparations, decorating the tree, arranging the barracks to create a festive atmosphere, and beginning food preparation for the evening meal. American authorities had authorized a special recreation period extension, allowing the women to remain awake past normal lights out to observe their traditional celebration.
At 6 o'clock, Lieutenant Mitchell and Corporal Walsh arrived with unexpected additions, a small choir from a local Lutheran church composed of elderly German-American women who had volunteered to sing Christmas carols for the prisoners. The 8 women, ages ranging from 60 to 75, entered the barracks carrying song sheets and offering warm greetings in German. Their presence represented extraordinary trust, civilians entering a military prison to fellowship with enemy prisoners based purely on shared cultural and religious tradition. The singing began with Stille Nacht, Silent Night. The carol's simple melody, originated in Austria but beloved throughout German-speaking lands, filled the barracks. German prisoners and German-American civilians sang together, their voices joined by the American guards who hummed along despite not knowing the German words. Anna Weber later described the moment as transformative. When we sang together, prisoners and free women, Germans and Americans, enemies and friends, the war seemed like a terrible mistake rather than an inevitable conflict. Music created something that transcended the politics and hatred. The choir stayed for 40 minutes, leading the prisoners through a dozen traditional German Christmas carols before departing with wishes for peace and blessings. Their departure left the prisoners alone with their American guards for the Christmas Eve meal. Lieutenant Mitchell had arranged for the kitchen staff to prepare the traditional German dishes based on recipes provided by Ilse Schneider, and now the platters arrived, carried by American enlisted men who had volunteered for Christmas Eve duty to allow maximum numbers of American soldiers to take leave. The meal exceeded anything the women had eaten since before the war. Roasted goose with crispy skin, rich gravy made with real butter and wine, red cabbage braised with apples and vinegar, potato dumplings light and fluffy, and fresh-baked stollen, fragrant with vanilla, almonds, and dried fruits. The portions were generous, the presentation careful, the quality superior to what German civilians were receiving that same Christmas Eve in bombed cities with dwindling food supplies. The cognitive dissonance intensified as the women ate. Greta's family in Dresden was likely huddled in a cellar, hoping to survive another night of Allied bombing raids, subsisting on thin soup and black bread if they had food at all. Her younger sister, still in Germany, had written in her last letter about the desperate hunger, the cold that penetrated their damaged house, the fear that permeated every moment. Yet here, Greta sat warm, well-fed, safe, celebrated by the enemy who was destroying her homeland. I felt guilty, she later wrote. Guilty for being warm when they were cold. Guilty for being safe when they faced bombs. Guilty for being fed when they starved. But I also felt something else, gratitude. And that gratitude toward my captors while my family suffered felt like betrayal. The emotional confusion was overwhelming. After dinner, Lieutenant Mitchell made an announcement that stunned the prisoners. "We've arranged for you to attend Christmas services tomorrow morning at the camp chapel. Attendance is voluntary, but we've confirmed the chaplain will conduct a portion of the service in German. We'll provide appropriate escort and supervision." The offer to attend religious services represented another unexpected accommodation. Military regulations allowed POWs to practice their faith, but actively facilitating attendance at formal worship services demonstrated commitment to prisoners' spiritual well-being beyond minimum requirements. Christmas morning dawned clear and cold, temperature dropping to 20 degrees overnight. The women who chose to attend services, 19 of the 23, dressed in their best available clothing, Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms cleaned and pressed, hair carefully arranged, carrying themselves with dignity despite their prisoner status. The walk to the chapel took them through portions of the camp they rarely visited, past American troops who watched, with curiosity but without hostility, past decorated buildings where American soldiers were celebrating their own Christmas far from home. The chapel service included American military personnel, camp staff, and the German female prisoners in a separate section. The chaplain, Captain Robert Harrison, conducted the service primarily in English but incorporated German hymns and prayers, fulfilling his promise to Lieutenant Mitchell. The sermon, delivered in both languages with assistance from a translator, focused on themes of peace, reconciliation, and hope, messages that resonated powerfully with prisoners and captors alike
in that 5th year of devastating war. During the closing hymn, O Come, All Ye Faithful, sung in both English and German simultaneously, several of the German women wept openly. The American soldiers present, some barely older than the German prisoners, maintained their composure, but many showed visible emotion. Captain Harrison later noted in his chaplain's report that the service represented one of the most moving moments of his military career, watching former enemies worship together, acknowledging their shared humanity through shared faith. The afternoon Christmas celebration continued in the barracks with the opening of the packages from American families and Red Cross. The women gathered in a circle, taking turns opening gifts while others watched, exclaiming over the contents, sharing chocolate and other treats. The sense of community that developed transcended their prisoner status, creating a temporary bubble of normalcy and celebration despite the surrounding reality of captivity and war. Anna Weber opened her package to find knitting needles, several skeins of soft wool yarn, a bar of rose-scented soap, and a small leather-bound notebook with a handwritten inscription. For your thoughts and memories, may you return safely home. Ruth Morrison, Philadelphia. The notebook became a diary where Weber documented her remaining months in captivity, preserving details that would later provide historians with invaluable first-hand accounts of the female POW experience.
The transformation that occurred during those Christmas celebrations represented more than temporary goodwill. American military authorities understood that humane treatment of prisoners served strategic purposes beyond simple ethics. The psychological impact of kindness, particularly when it contradicted enemy propaganda, created doubts about everything the prisoners had been taught. If Americans were capable of such generosity toward their enemies, what else might Nazi propaganda have lied about? The letters written by female prisoners to their families in Germany, though censored by military authorities, conveyed powerful messages that undermined German morale and Nazi narratives. Greta's letter home, sent in early January 1945, carefully described the Christmas celebration in terms that passed censorship. We were allowed to observe our traditional holiday. We had a tree, decorations, good food, and even gifts from American families. The guards treated us with respect and kindness. I am warm, well-fed, and safe. Please do not worry about me. These simple statements, multiplied across thousands of POW letters reaching Germany, systematically contradicted Nazi propaganda about American brutality toward prisoners. The post-Christmas period brought a subtle but significant shift in the relationship between prisoners and guards. The shared celebration had created personal connections that transcended the captor-captive dynamic. Lieutenant Mitchell began organizing additional cultural activities, movie screenings, educational classes, recreational programs, building on the success of the Christmas celebration. The female prisoners, initially suspicious of American motives, increasingly accepted that the kindness they experienced was genuine rather than manipulative. International Red Cross inspection reports from early 1945 specifically commended Camp Reynolds for its treatment of female prisoners. The January 1945 report noted, "The female prisoners section demonstrates exemplary conditions. The prisoners appear healthy, well-nourished, and in good spirits." The recent Christmas celebration, documented through photographs and interviews, represents an outstanding example of humane treatment exceeding convention requirements while supporting prisoner rehabilitation and psychological well-being.
The broader implications of the Christmas celebration extended beyond Camp Reynolds. Word spread through the POW network about the treatment female prisoners received in American camps. This information influenced German military women facing capture decisions in the war's final months. Knowing that surrender to Americans meant protection rather than punishment, many German auxiliary women chose capture over desperate last stands or flight towards Soviet-controlled areas where the treatment of women was notoriously harsh. The contrast between American treatment of female POWs and Soviet treatment created a stark divide in post-war testimonies. German military women captured by Soviet forces faced systematic abuse, exploitation, and often death during forced marches westward. Those captured by Americans, like the women at Camp Reynolds, returned home after the war with testimonies of unexpected humanity, proper treatment, and even kindness from their captors. These contrasting experiences shaped post-war German attitudes toward the occupying powers and influenced the development of West Germany's orientation toward the Western Allies. For the women at Camp Reynolds, the Christmas celebration of 1944 represented a turning point in their captivity experience and their psychological orientation toward their captors. Ilse Schneider later wrote in her post-war memoir, published in Germany in 1962, that Christmas Eve in the Pennsylvania POW camp remained one of the most emotionally complex and meaningful Christmas celebrations of her life. We were prisoners celebrating with our enemies. We were Germans fed by Americans while Germans starved. We were women treated with dignity by soldiers we'd been taught to fear. The contradictions were overwhelming, but they taught me something essential about humanity's capacity for kindness, even in war's darkest moments. The practical impact on the women's physical and mental health was documented through medical records maintained by camp doctors. Weight measurements, blood pressure readings, and psychological assessments conducted in the months following the Christmas celebration showed continued improvement in overall health and reduced signs of depression and anxiety compared to initial intake evaluations. The camp psychiatrist, Major Helen Crawford, noted in her February 1945 report that the Christmas celebration had provided significant therapeutic benefit to the female prisoners, helping them process their captivity experience in healthier ways and reducing the trauma typically associated with prisoner status. The educational component of the Christmas experience also proved valuable. Many of the younger German women, raised entirely under Nazi rule, had limited exposure to democratic values or alternative political systems. The American willingness to honor their cultural traditions while they remained prisoners demonstrated a respect for individual dignity that contradicted totalitarian principles. Lieutenant Mitchell organized informal discussion groups in the weeks following Christmas where female prisoners could ask questions about American society, democracy, and women's roles in America. These conversations, documented in their weekly reports, revealed prisoners' growing interest in American values and increasing skepticism about Nazi ideology. By spring 1945, as the European War approached its conclusion, the women at Camp Reynolds had become a remarkably cohesive community with their American supervisors. The Christmas celebration had established a foundation of mutual respect that transformed the entire prisoner experience. When news arrived of Germany's surrender in May 1945, the American guards found themselves consoling the German prisoners, many of whom wept not from joy, but from grief over their homeland's devastation and uncertainty about their families' fates. The repatriation process began in summer 1945, with female POWs being processed for return to Germany based on family situation, health status, and availability of transportation to occupied zones. The departures proved emotional for both prisoners and American staff. Lieutenant Mitchell wrote in her final report on the female prisoner section, "These women arrived as enemy combatants. They depart as human beings we have come to respect and, in many cases, genuinely care about." The Christmas celebration we organized in December 1944 became a catalyst for transformation that exceeded our expectations. I believe these women will return to Germany as advocates for democratic values and American friendship. Greta Hoffmann's departure from Camp Reynolds in July 1945 exemplified the complex emotions surrounding repatriation. She had spent 13 months in American captivity, arriving as a committed Nazi auxiliary and leaving as a young woman whose worldview had been fundamentally challenged. In her final letter to Mrs. Eleanor Thompson, the Harrisburg woman who had sent her a Christmas package, Greta wrote words that captured the experience of many female POWs. You showed me kindness when you could have shown hatred. You gave me gifts when you could have given nothing. You made Christmas possible when I expected only darkness. I will never forget this. I will tell my children and grandchildren about the Americans who treated their enemies with such humanity. Thank you for helping me remember that even in war, goodness can survive. The legacy of the Christmas celebration at Camp Reynolds and similar events at other POW camps housing female prisoners extended far beyond the immediate wartime context. Post-war studies of POW experiences consistently identified humane treatment, cultural respect, and unexpected kindness as factors that significantly influenced prisoners' post-war attitudes toward their former captors. The German women who returned home after experiencing American captivity became informal ambassadors for American values, their personal testimonies countering both Nazi propaganda and Soviet influence in occupied Germany. Several of the women from Camp Reynolds maintained correspondence with American staff members for decades after the war. Anna Weber exchanged letters with Lieutenant Mitchell until Mitchell's death in 1978, a 33-year friendship that transcended their wartime roles. Ilse Schneider visited the United States in 1967, traveling to Pennsylvania to reunite with several women who had been imprisoned with her and to visit Corporal Walsh, who had helped them bake Christmas cookies in December 1944. These enduring connections demonstrated that the Christmas celebration had created bonds that survived war's end and shaped personal relationships across national boundaries for lifetimes. The historical documentation of the Christmas celebration, photographs preserved in camp records, letters in military archives, international Red Cross reports, and post-war memoirs, provides evidence of an approach to prisoner treatment that reflected American values at their best. The decision to support cultural celebrations for enemy prisoners, to provide gifts and special meals, to facilitate religious observance and create opportunities for joy, even in captivity, demonstrated a commitment to human dignity that transcended military necessity or strategic calculation. Modern historians examining POW treatment during World War II consistently note the stark contrast between American and British treatment of Axis prisoners compared to German and especially Soviet treatment of Allied prisoners. The Christmas celebrations for female POWs represent a specific example of this broader pattern, a pattern that revealed fundamental differences in how democratic and totalitarian systems valued human life and dignity. The women at Camp Reynolds were enemies, but they were also human beings deserving of respect, cultural acknowledgement, and basic kindness. American military authorities understood this distinction and acted accordingly. The story of that Christmas in 1944 ends where it began, in Barracks 7 at Camp Reynolds, Pennsylvania. But it echoes through decades of subsequent history, through the lives of women who returned to Germany carrying memories of unexpected kindness, through the transformation of enemy prisoners into advocates for American values, through the lasting friendships that proved war could separate nations but not destroy humanity's capacity for compassion. When Greta Hoffman, as an elderly woman in the 1990s, was interviewed about her POW experience, she returned repeatedly to that Christmas celebration. They didn't have to do any of it, she said. We were prisoners. They could have simply kept us alive, met the basic requirements, and nothing more. But they chose kindness.
They chose to recognize our humanity. They gave us Christmas when they could have given us nothing. That choice, that generosity, changed everything. It changed how I saw Americans, how I saw the war, how I saw the world. It changed me. The German comfort girls, military auxiliary women who served the Wehrmacht and became prisoners of war, expected punishment, exploitation, perhaps cruelty. Instead, they received Christmas. They received gifts and food and celebration and dignity. They received treatment that exceeded legal requirements and demonstrated values that contradicted everything they had been taught about their enemies. And in receiving these things, in experiencing this unexpected humanity, they discovered truths about democracy, about American society, and about the possibility of maintaining human decency even in war's darkest hours. The Christmas celebration of 1944 at Camp Reynolds was just one event, in one camp, among many. But for the women who lived it and for the American soldiers who made it possible, it represented something profound. Proof that even in total war, even between enemies, the choice for kindness, respect, and shared humanity remained possible. And sometimes, that choice made all the difference.